bitter day. I sat in the office studying the books, and I saw production costs going up and up and up, but production was going down, down, down. He said, I immediately drew this to attention of my pop, and Pop said, son, get rid of all that rented acreage you got immediately. The more land we farm, the quicker we're going broke. They were farming around 1,000 acres. They only had about 300 something of their own. Anyway, so he got rid of the rented acres, and Pop said, son, you got to find a better way to farm. So he started looking at alternative farming methods, and he got on to no-till. Instead of turning the soil upside down with a big disc or moldboard and then disking again, making a seed bed and then bed and all that stuff, he would wait till the cotton plant is finished and, decaying away after it's picked. And he would disc harrow 1 inch deep, period. That's all. That's 1 inch deep. And then that cotton plant is in that 1 inch of soil and it's beginning to decay and everything. He said then a certain time before the cotton plant time, I'd go out there with cultivators or bedders and I'd take all that loose soil and put it up in a mound. He says, and then hoping I get at least an hour, and then he plant his seed down at the bottom of that mound of all that, that trash and that loose soil. And he keeps his tractor wheels in the same rows all the time. So that spot don't get compacted, because once in a while it does rain up there. He said, after a few years of doing that, I noticed my cotton was always doing better than the neighbors. So I said, well, that's working good. He says, I'm going to look at some more of these alternative farming methods. So he started using all the snake oils and foo-foo dust and everything with that, and they all do some good. And this one guy came back and he said, did you use sugar or molasses with my product like I told you? He said, no, you want the neighbors to laugh at me? He said, well, the stuff I sold you were live microbes. They were free fixing nitrogen. They didn't have to live on a nodule and a legume, live in a nodule on a legume. He said they live free in the air. They live on the leaf of the cotton plant, on the soil, and everywhere. He says, but they need proteins, and the protein is made from nitrogen. He said if you feed these microbes a carbohydrate, sugar, molasses, or something, now they can build their bodies and trap nitrogen to build proteins and everything, and they expand.
Okay.
He said they fix nitrogen directly out of the air to build the proteins in their bodies. When they die, they leave all that fertility in the soil. And he actually fixed more than they need. So he started doing that. And after several years, then his cotton is looking like that, when the neighbors is still looking like this. So I need to know about that. So I got permission to go both fields and dig up a lot of soil and homogenize it both fields, and send both soil samples to 2 labs, both of these labs and both of these 2 labs. So I had 2 labs testing each soil. Make sure I got a good test. Now at this point, NPK minus traces and pH came back almost identical. So that didn't tell me nothing. The pH was slightly lower in this field because he used anhydrous ammonia and some acidified fertilizer. Other than that, everything else was the same. The pH was 6.9, in this field it was 7. Well, that's not enough to do anything. So, dang it, I got sinus this morning from the dust or something. Anyway, so I had this Dr. Don Marks I met years ago, giving a talk out in California, as mycorrhizal specialist. So I called him and asked him if the mycorrhizal fungi could be playing part in this. He said, I said, how can I find out? He said, well, go to both fields, randomly dig up cotton plants. He says, I want the root ball with the dirt, throw the top away. He said, send me about 10 or 12 from both fields, randomly selected. Keep them separate, keep them wrapped separate. He said, send them to the slab and put your phone number, your address, and put your fax in there too, to make it easy for them. So after about 2.5 weeks, I got a fax from him, and across the front of the fax in big black pencil marks, he wrote, there's a striking difference between 2 fields. He said, this field here was so well colonized with the mycorrhizal fungi, it had the equivalent of 10 times more root.
Wow.
He said, this field I found 2% on 1 root. That's all. So I said, why the difference? He said, Malcolm, evidently this guy is doing something to destroy the beneficial soil life. Too much deep plowing, anhydrous ammonia, pesticides, and some chemical fertilizer. I said, well, yeah. I said, this guy over here now is organic. He said, okay, there's one feather, there's another feather in your cap. Wasn't killing off the beneficials, and he was putting out more beneficials. Then he sent me this picture. This picture is what told the whole story. This is a little pine tree up in sunlight. It had green chlorophyll. It had pores on the leaf like I showed you.
Mm-hmm.
Those pores open, they take in air, they take the carbohydrates, the carbon out of the air, mix hydrogen and oxygen to it, make carbohydrates, and sends 80% of the carbohydrates it manufactures. I don't know exactly how it makes the carbohydrates. I think it adds carbon and oxygen to it. No, or nitrogen and oxygen. I think that's right. Anyway, it does it. It makes carbohydrates. Don't quote me on that. It makes carbohydrates. 80% of the carbohydrates are sent down to the root. This leaf system only keeps 20% of the carbohydrates. The root needs a high amount of it to manufacture, to gather up nutrients, and to send sugars up there to the leaf surface so the leaf surface can make carbohydrates.
Right.
It sends, anyway, all of this out here is a mycorrhizal fungi. So this little plant here, according to Elaine Ingram, has not way more than 10 times more root surface. You see, here's the root surface right here. All the rest of this is beneficial microbes of some type, especially the mycorrhizal fungi. Elaine Ingram tells me this mycorrhizal fungi can go as much as 121 feet in either direction from a tree. And that mycorrhizal fungi is picking up nutrients and moisture and giving it to the tree. And the tree is taking that moisture and that minerals, moisture and minerals, up to the leaf surface, and the leaf is taking it and manufacturing carbohydrates. I got it written up in my books. I can't remember all this stuff all the time. You can read it in there and then quote it right. And like this little tree here has the equivalent of 10 times more plant than if it didn't have those beneficial microbes. And that organic cotton had the equivalent of 10 times more plant because of the mycorrhizal fungi. So that's why it was beautiful like this. And this guy had no beneficial soil microbes, and it's suffering like that. Equal rainfall, equal soil, equal fertility and everything. It's the life. Elaine Ingram now tells me there's 10,000 species of beneficial bacteria and 3,000 species of beneficial fungi in that rhizosphere. Huh. And they're all there for one reason. Because the little plant is manufacturing carbohydrates. Every living thing needs energy. Energy is made by the plant from the carbon, the hydrogen, and oxygen in the sunlight. And all those microbes are there because a lot of them are cannibalistic, feeding on other microbes. Right. But still they're there for that reason. But they're all around in the soil, and their dead bodies are contributing to the fertility of the soil. And their exudes and whatever they do, tongue around and what have you. So that's what you need to make a plant grow. And this was all written up in a book called Soil and Health by Sir Albert Howard years ago. He was making compost and putting it in fields and growing great fruit trees. Where he didn't use the compost, it was a struggle. And he tested N, and K. And by God, they were wrinkled, but still, where he put that compost. And the compost, if you test it, it's a 1-1-1. It's not a 20-20-20 per se. It's barely even 1-1-1. But then Albert Howard discovered that mycorrhizal fungi growing out massively in the soil and collecting nutrients and giving it to that plant.
Is that the same fungus that shows up in compost piles?
I don't know if it's the same fungus that grows in a compost pile. That mycorrhizal fungi has to get its energy from the green.
Oh, okay.
But there's all types of microbes in it.
Right.
But somehow, where he used the compost, the trees were getting more nutrients and they were manufacturing more carbohydrates than they needed. And so this was able to feed the mycorrhizal underground.
Right.
That's really the way it works.
Cool.
Interesting. Now you know more than most college professors. I think that's all, yeah.
That's it? Cool.
Anyway, I'm glad you came.